All right, well, good morning. We're so glad you guys are here, that you braved the weather, and that you guys came to be with us. You could be a million other places, but you're here with us, and so we're so grateful for that. A couple of announcements before we get started. Today, there was supposed to be a swim party at my house for fifth graders going sixth grade. We're not doing that now, and so that'll be next week. And so if you have a fifth grader about to move into sixth grade, we want to get them acclimated with student ministry. Trey is doing a great job back there, and so his team and all the youth volunteers. And so that will be moved to next week. So if you have a sixth grader swim party at my house next week, we'd love to have your kids. Also, and I'm going to say this wrong every time, so sorry, David, Christ Cars and Coffee. Did I say it right? I said it right. Christ Cars and Coffee. So it's going to be like a men's fellowship starting next week at Cedar Grove Coffee House from 8 to 10. If you got a car you want to show off, just bring it out, and guys are going to sit around and talk about life, cars, coffee. We're going to do it once. We'll do it a few more times. There's also a couple other men's events coming up. We got a night at the Bats coming up. We'll start advertising next week. We got a guy that donated his suite to the Bats game, so we'll do that. And then also we'll have our annual gun shoot coming up for too long, so make sure and pay attention to all that stuff coming up for men's ministry. I know there's other stuff coming on, but they didn't tell me, so you'll just have to look on the app. Download the app. Best way to stay connected with everything going on. And so, again, we're so glad you're here. If this is your first time, stop by the Welcome Center. We have a gift for you just for being here. Even if we never see you again, we want to give you a gift for being here with us today. And so we are starting a new series. In this series today, I'm going to cover kind of a general overview of what we're going to talk about, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit more. But I hate to tell you guys, especially teachers, my wife is a teacher, summer's over. And so it's pretty much done. Kids go back to school, like not this Tuesday, but the next Tuesday. I know we have a lot of teachers here, so I'm so sorry that your summer is already over. But it is. And not only is summer almost over, but the reality is we just 2 weeks ago hit over the halfway point for this year. And so this year is more than halfway over. Like, isn't that insane, right? And so, in fact, I put the number up for you. There are 156 days left in this year. 156 days. That breaks down to 5 months and 3 days, 22 weeks and 2 days, and 3,744 hours left in this year. So, did you do a lot? Yeah. And so how's it going? How is 2024 treating you? We always talk about this at the beginning of every year, that we always have these goals and plans every year we make kind of going into the next year. And so how are you doing? Like, is 2024 everything that you hoped for? I don't know if you guys know, there's a lot of controversy this year. There's some elections going on that I've heard about. The Olympics, that started crazy. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. But for you personally, how's it going? And not only is it the fact that this year is already halfway over, but just like when we think about life, like how fast it moves, how quickly it goes. So I want to tell a story, and then I want to kind of launch into some ideas and thoughts. Now, I've used this story before, so it's not new to most of you guys. And if you've been around or ever studied the Bible, you probably are familiar somewhat with this story. But the more I kind of see this story, I kind of relate to this guy, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. So it takes place in John chapter 5, and so it starts in verse 1. It says this: Later, Jesus went to Jerusalem for a special feast. In Jerusalem, there's a pool with 5 covered porches, which is called Bethesda in the Hebrew language. The pool is near the sheep gate. Many sick people were lying on the porches beside the pool. Some were blind, some were crippled, and some were paralyzed. Now, before we go to the next slide, here's why they're there. So the belief was that this was like a special, like kind of magical healing place, that there was an angel there. Later, the Catholics were referred to this angel as Raphael. And so that there was this angel that would come in. If the angel would come down and kind of stir the water, then the first person to get into the pool after this water had been stirred by this angel would receive a healing. Now, when I was studying this, what I learned is we don't have any historical evidence that anybody was actually ever healed. We just know this is what people believed happened. And so these people, these crippled people, and these people who had been paralyzed and had these rough lives, they would gather at this pool in hopes that they would be the first one to kind of receive this miracle, this healing from this water. And so people would gather there. Today you can still go there. It's still an historical site, and it still holds this idea of healing and stuff when people go to visit it. And so they're there, and so Jesus goes to this place. He would have been familiar with it and have heard of it before. And so we get there, and then a new person is introduced into this story in verse 5. All right. A man was laying there who'd been sick for 38 years. Now, the context, we don't know if he'd actually been by the pool for 38 years, but the way it's written seems to indicate for 38 years he has been laying by this pool. For 38 years. I mean, that is a long time. Like, I'm 42, about to be 43 this year. So from the time I was 5 up until this point in my life, okay, think about that. 38 years just laying at this pool. Day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, he's just laying there, hoping that he gets to be healed. Now, again, you got to remember, we have no historical evidence that anybody was actually ever healed at this place. And yet for 38 years, not only this guy, but all of these people keep gathering at this space, hoping and waiting for something to change, for something to happen to make a difference. So, verse 6, when Jesus saw the man and knew that he had been sick for such a long time, Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be well?" Now, when you read this, my first thought is like, Jesus, that's a dumb question, right? I mean, we probably shouldn't say Jesus asked dumb questions. I'm sorry. But, like, when we see that, you want to be like, yeah, like the dude's been here for 38 years hoping and praying and waiting. And not just this guy. Like, there's other people gathered around this pool hoping and praying. Do you want to be well? I mean, it sounds a little bit insensitive. And so, of course, he wants to be well. And so, verse 7, the sick man answered, "Sir, there is no one to help me get into the pool when the water starts moving. While I am coming to the water, someone else always gets in before me." You guys remember Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh? Remember that guy? Like, it's all, yeah. So it's kind of a little Eeyore moment, like, oh, it's not working out. Somebody's always there. Now, again, there's people getting in the pool before him, but we don't even know if this guy's ever actually even seen someone get better. But yet he keeps holding on to this belief over and over and over again. In Eugene Peterson's book, Living Well, he talks about this idea that you can almost hear like the self-pity here, that he's continuing to blame others for this life, even though I'm sure it was a terrible situation that he finds himself in. And so Jesus says, "Do you want to be healed?" But this man, he's just like, rather than saying yes, which is what most of us would say, he comes up with another excuse for why he is where he is. And then Jesus said to him in verse 8, "Stand up, pick up your mat, and walk." And immediately the man was well. He picked up his mat and began to walk. Now, obviously, this is a story about Jesus doing something miraculous. Right? This is about Jesus doing something that only Jesus could do. And so we know that in context of the story. But what I want to talk about, and where I kind of want to launch into this series about, is the thinking behind the man, not behind the moment. I mean, this idea of this guy doing the same thing over and over again, 38 years. And then obviously he has this moment where there's this catalyst to this change. And obviously in this moment we know that it's Jesus that is the catalyst in this change. But this idea of just kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Jesus asked the question to the man, "Do you want to be well?" And I think it's an interesting question for us to kind of ponder. Do we want to be well, right? And so, like, we talk about goals that we set for ourselves, and so we'll kind of break down a lot of different things. But for some of us, maybe like going into this year, we talked about earlier that, you know, you have fitness goals, or like maybe like some of us, you know, it's summertime, and so we're like, you know, I want to lose weight or something like that, you know, and so you have these goals. I remember a few years ago when I was trying to kind of get my fitness journey started back up that I wanted to do some things right, but I was also willing to sit in line 35 minutes at Bojangles to get a steak biscuit. So, you know, there's give and take there, right? Or for example, you know, you want to get better in your finances, but then the new iPhone came out, right? So you want to get that, or you love to eat out and it's not cheap anymore. And, and so we say these things, but yet then we keep doing these other things that work against the things that we want. For example, for some of us, when it comes to church, like we want to get closer to God, understand things better, be more spiritual or more in tune with our beliefs and all of this stuff. And yet we keep doing the same thing over and over again. You've probably heard this idea before. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? And so that's crazy that we keep doing this over and over and over again. And we keep doing this thing and just, we have excuses. I mean, this is the point of this story with this guy before Jesus heals him. Like, he's got excuses why he is where he is for 38 years, doing the same thing over and over again. The reality is that change and willing to change and do something different, to have this catalyst in your life, it's hard. It's difficult, right? I've told you guys this story before. So I started running when I was early on in high school. And I'll be honest with you, the reason I started running in 8th grade was because I liked a girl and she ran. So I was like, well, maybe I should run too. And so I did it, and it was good. And I ran all through high school and all that stuff and loved running. And then I just kind of gave up on running. And when I was in my 20s, mid-20s, I decided that I needed to start running again. All the years of sitting on my couch playing Tiger Woods golf and eating pizza had caught up with me, okay? And so I decided to start running again. And I remember, I got up and I put on my New Balances and put on some running shorts and decided I was going to go run. I think I even bought a GPS watch, which is totally putting the cart before the horse, right? And so I get up, I'm getting ready to run. And I take off down our street, and in my mind, I've just ran a marathon, right? It's been a long run. I looked down at my watch, 2 minutes and 45 seconds had passed, right? I'd made it 10 houses, and I remember this. I stopped, I looked down at my feet, and I just threw up. I just threw up right there on the spot. And I could have given up because it was hard and it was difficult. But day after day, I just went a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. And then eventually I started running races and doing all this stuff. And the reason I tell you that story is because everything in life worth doing is hard or difficult at first, right? It's just reality. And it takes this routine, and it takes being willing to, as we're talking about time, investing the time, right? 156 days left in this year. 3,774 minutes left in this year. Now, the excuse that we give for most of us when it comes to kind of changing is, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to invest into this. I am too busy. I'm too busy to pray, read my Bible more, do a devotion, study more, exercise more, cook so I don't have to eat out all the time. I'm too busy to get together with people I need to get together with. I'm too busy to have coffee with someone. Well, those are all good excuses because we are busy in life. Until I found this out. Did you know that the average American spends 7.3 hours a day on internet or on screens? 7.3 hours a day is our average on a screen. Now, the rest of the world's 5.8, so we're Americans. We're always first, right? And so 7.3 hours a day on internet or on the screens. A decade ago, okay, it was only 3.5 hours a day. So we've doubled our time, all right? Or think about this, maybe you've had a long day. We all have long days or stressful days, and so we get home and we want to decompress or kind of do something. And rather than do something that maybe actually makes us better or healthier or more spiritual or gets us in tune or makes us really help us decompress, what do? We get on our phone, and I'm not judging anybody because I do the same thing. And we get on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, Amazon, and all of a sudden, 2 hours have passed, right? Just scrolling, right? I mean, here's a question for you. How did we even go to the bathroom before phones, right? I mean, never mind, I'm not going to tell that part. Okay. Never mind. All right, so, just whenever you use somebody else's phone, isn't it weird to think that was in the bathroom with them? But anyway, so again, I shouldn't have said it, but there we go. All right, so 7 hours a day, right? And so we don't have the time. We have all the excuses, but 7 hours a day, what if you could recoup some of that time? And again, this is not a sermon about you shouldn't be on your phones or nothing like that. This is just an idea of we always have excuses as to why we can't do these things. While we can't invest more times in ourselves and in our faith. While we can't invest more times in our spiritual growth or physical growth or health or whatever it is. Now, I realize committing to something seems very daunting. So the question is, for us, as we kind of launch in this 4-week series, what can you do in 156 days? What can you do? How do you help make yourself better and stronger and healthier spiritually, physically, all of these things? Now, 156 days doesn't seem like much time. Years ago, I don't know if you guys ever did this. Did anybody do P90X? Anybody, show of hands? Yeah, a couple of us, right? What kind of stew did you make? Do you remember making the potato stew? Do you remember that? Oh, you didn't get that far? Okay. So, all right. So, Tony Horton, P90X, all right. He had to make the stew. Remember? Never mind. All right. So 90 days, this huge phenom that he came out with, that you could do anything for 90 days, right? And then his whole thing was you could do anything for 30 seconds. You could do anything for 1 minute. You could do anything. All right, so what could you do in 156 days? Okay, and I don't even want to make this series, when we talk about time, about days as much as your whole life. 38 years, this guy sits by this pool. Knowing, and there's nothing he could do about it, but he's not where he wants to be. He's not healthy. He's not whole. All right? And so what about you? Do you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get better, and yet you're still the same? All right? So do you want to get well? That's the question that Jesus asks. All right? And so here are some thoughts and some ideas. There's 7 things that I have been thinking about studying, and you can come up with your own list. You can just steal mine. That's fine. But 7 things that when I think about what we have left to do, maybe in accomplishing this year, 7 ideas of things that we can do. And so these are going to be really practical. Some of these things we're going to come back and talk about over the next 4 weeks. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is this one, is to challenge yourself and your ideas. Now, the reason I say this is for me, when I read this story, I think about this guy. For 38 years, he's in this mindset. 38 years. But it's also 38 years of nothing changing. 38 years. So the question is, for him, but also, and I think Jesus challenges this, but also for us, is it working? Is the mindset that you have, is it actually working? Now, I'm not talking about challenging your belief in God or Jesus or Christianity. I mean, I think maybe for some of us, it's the idea of we need to be open to those ideas. And that might be part of it. But are you willing to challenge your own frames of reference from time to time? Are you willing to change your own ideologies about how things are? There's this popular word in church circles today, and some of you, if you're familiar with it, might get a little nervous here, but it's the word deconstruction. Now, deconstruction is a super popular word, and if you don't believe me, just Google it later. You'll see all kinds of articles and ideas and books. And so deconstruction is simply the idea of that most of us have grown up with some type of faith system, but eventually life happens or challenges happen, and you get to this point where all of a sudden you start to question some things. And so there's a whole bunch of people and guys that are going through this deconstruction phase where they're taking their faith apart piece by piece. Now, the key to deconstruction, to me, is the idea of we deconstruct only to reconstruct, right? So you guys ever done like a remodel on your house, right? Like a bathroom or something? So you tear it apart in some ways, but does anybody leave it like that? No, you'd be a crazy person, okay? Like, yeah, we used to have a toilet there. Now there's a hole. Good luck, okay? No, so you have to reconstruct, right? If you don't reconstruct, then all deconstruction is chaos. And so here's why I say that. For some of us, when it comes to our faith journey, we might feel stuck. And the question I would pose is, what are you doing? Are you doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results? Or have you ever questioned, some of these things? The Bible talks to us about having childlike faith. But it doesn't mean that you're a child in your faith, right? For some of us, we're still holding on to some of the little things that, as a kid, and here's why I say that. We understand life as we grow. We understand God. We understand Jesus. We understand these stories differently as we grow. Paul talks about this idea that when you're like an infant, like you live off of milk, okay? But as you grow in your faith, just as you grow as a human being, you eventually start to eat other things. And so maybe the same thing needs to be questioned about some of our faith, is to look at some of these long-held ideas that we have, our beliefs, and maybe start to look at some of them and to study more and to read more. Don't just take people that wear microphones on stage as words for things. Like, actually invest in yourself and in your faith. And even if it comes to challenging some of your long-held beliefs, what I've often found is when you start to challenge them, sometimes you actually start to strengthen them, because now you have some weight behind them as you learn, as you grow in your faith. Now, the other side of this idea of challenging yourself and your ideas, and we'll talk more about this later, is to become more self-aware of who we are. We talked about this in this last series. Becoming more self-aware of who we are and being honest with ourselves and the things that are going on in here, but also the things going on in here. The other thing, and I want to say this real quickly, and I'll get through it real quick, is it doesn't take a lot of research to look at the latest news headlines and ongoing events and debates, not only in the church, but also in our world and even in our country. The reality is we live in a very polarizing time. And because we live in a polarizing time and a polarizing world, it's easy to write people off. It's easy to write ideas off. And because of that, we never have this system in which we grow. A few years ago, I invested in myself for a little while. And let me, before I say this, it's just like my phone toilet comment a couple minutes ago. Don't do this. But a couple years ago, I decided that I was going to read the 3 best sellers when it comes to atheism. And so I landed on Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and Sam Harris' The End of Faith. Now, I read all 3 of those books. They were difficult, and they were hard. And the reason they were difficult and they were hard is because I come from the other viewpoint, okay? But as I'm reading these books, here's what I'm understanding. There's a whole world and a whole generation of young people that are asking some of these questions and maybe not always getting the best answers. It helped me to understand people that are on the other side of the faith journey than I am. But it also helped me grow in my own faith as I worked through some of the complicated and difficult things. And so I say all that to say sometimes if we get in a place where we feel stuck or it's not working, the best thing we can do is to challenge yourself and your ideas. Study, learn, grow, have conversations with people, okay? Which leads to my next thing of something that maybe we can do if we find ourselves in a stuck place is this. And this is a big one to me, I think, is to do this, to share more meals with people. Okay, there's always this idea throughout Scripture we see, and we did a whole series about it called Feast about 1.5 years ago. There's this whole idea about when we share a meal with someone. And in their culture, this was a big deal to actually gather at a table with somebody and to be able to share a meal and to learn and to grow. And to even share, we see Jesus doing this, sharing a meal with people who are vastly different than you and think differently than you and people that can challenge you and your ideas. The reality is, for many of us, if we're honest, a lot of our meals are drive-through, eat lunch at your desk, or at dinner time, catch up on some Netflix around the couch. But the idea of investing not only in yourself by sharing a meal with somebody. And maybe it starts as simply as just sharing a meal with someone around your home, your family. Okay? But to take some time to invest not only in yourself, but to other people. I find it interesting that almost all of the big moments of life that we experience take place when we're sharing a meal with someone. For example, everybody celebrates birthdays, right? What do you do on birthdays? We go out to dinner. Even with people we don't want to, right? Sometimes, right? Well, we go out to dinner. That's part of it. Weddings. How does a wedding end? With a feast, with a reception. And even funerals. How does it end? With a wake, with a meal amongst the family. There's this impactful sacredness to sharing a meal with someone. So maybe we should start to share more meals with people, to learn from each other, to invest in each other, to take some time to get to know each other, and maybe even share a meal with someone who's different than you, someone you can learn from, someone that you can invest in, someone that you can grow with. And we'll talk more about that throughout this series, okay? So the next one is more complicated for some of us, so I'll be real careful with this one. Here's one, though. To complain less and to do more. Don't elbow anybody. Okay? But to complain less and to do more. We're all guilty of it, me included. We see something that's broken in culture, in the church, in government, in personal relationships, and our first instinct, mine too, is to complain about it, to say something about it, to get on and post something about it, to vent about it. I think this is momentarily helpful for relief from our frustrations, but it doesn't actually solve anything. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't help people that are actually trying to actually fix the problems. And so what if we took some time when we think about what's not working in our world and maybe in our lives and the things that we need to challenge, and it's this impulse to just complain, but not actually make a difference. Not actually be willing to invest in ourselves or maybe others, or to invest in the problem that we're complaining about. The reality is you may not by yourself be able to change the whole world, but you can change parts of your world. You can change things going on with you. And so we'll talk more about this, but maybe learn to complain less and do more. All right, here's another one. Don't elbow anybody. We're going to talk a lot about this one, but how about this one? To spend less time worrying. We all worry. I have a story about a moth that I'm going to tell you guys next week, and it might be the worst sermon ever, but I'm telling it anyway, okay? But it's just this idea. We spend so much time worrying. And Jesus tells us in Matthew 6:27, I mean, he's real blunt. He says, does worrying add anything to your life? And the answer, we know, even though you don't want to hear it, is no. Corrie ten Boom, in her book, The Hiding Place, worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrows, it empties today of its strength. And maybe for some of us, part of this stuck feeling we have is because we spend so much time and energy worrying. And maybe the reason we spend so much time where we feel like we're just stuck worrying is because we don't do enough of the next one, which is to simply to pray more. To pray more. Now, there's all kinds of spiritual disciplines that we have to talk about, but to actually pray more. One of my favorite quotes of all time comes from Martin Luther, and he was talking one day, and he said, because you know Martin Luther, he's super busy, super influential. He says, not Martin Luther King Jr., Martin Luther, Reformation, sorry, let me clarify. He says this, I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours of my day in prayer. Like he's like, I'm so busy. I have so much stuff I have to worry about. So because I'm so busy and because I have so much to worry about, I'm going to spend my first 3 hours in prayer. Which seems to us, we're like, that doesn't seem like good time management, right? But for him, this was important to him. James talks about this. Almost every writer we see talks about this idea of when we find ourselves in these struggles and these seasons that we have to learn to pray. No matter how busy we become committing to pray, spend more time praying, even if it's during our commute, even if it's during our time throughout the day. Like, remember, you've got 7 hours a day on a screen. You can find a few minutes to pray. Now, the next one is this. And again, we're going to come back and talk about all these as we talk about time. But here's the next one. To cut some others some slack. Sorry. Okay? In our social media area where everyone's opinions get a platform and it's easy to fall into the trap of getting angry about everything. I told you guys a couple weeks ago, like I get on Facebook to get angry. That's the dumbest thing ever, right? But that's what we do, right? And so we find ourselves in this place where we're always on edge with each other. And there is a lot culturally. There's a lot in the church. There's a lot in our community. There's a lot in relationships and all of these things. And there's all of this stuff that we have all this tension about. But maybe we all just need to relax a little bit. Remember the golden rule, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. See, when it comes to me, I want you to be patient and understanding and forgiving. So why wouldn't I offer the same to you? Right? And so maybe for some of us what we need to do is we need to learn when we realize like this isn't working. We're not getting better. It's because we hold all of this tension all the time, and so we have to learn to cut some others some slack. I love what James says in James chapter 3. He says this, but the wisdom that comes from God is first of all pure, then peaceful, gentle, and easy to please. And I love this. The wisdom that comes from God. So we always want the wisdom that God can give us is first of all pure, then peaceful, then gentle, and easy to please. This wisdom is always ready to help those who are troubled and to do good for others. It is always fair and honest. People who work for peace in a peaceful way plant a good crop of right living. Now, let me ask a difficult question. Does any of what he said describe you or me? And so maybe we have to learn to breathe a little bit, to cut others some slack. And while you're at it, here's the last one, to cut yourself some slack. I think some of us are very difficult on ourselves. We're hard on ourselves. It's easy for us to think about forgiving other people, but the idea of forgiving ourselves. We've all been driven to try to accomplish things and have these goals and these ideas of who we should be as people, but then we all end up falling short. We make mistakes. We failed. Some of us, this is very difficult, but I hate to tell you this is just simply being a human. It's part of it. So maybe you need to learn to cut yourself some slack. Here's where I'm at with these last couple ones. When you mess up, when you drop the ball, or you let people down, own it. Don't blame others. Don't take it out on other people. Own your mistakes and then seek the forgiveness you need to move forward. And then, after you do that, be quick to move on yourself and offer yourself the same grace that God is willing to give you. I think for a lot of us, we need to rest in God's grace a whole lot more. A generous God who wants to give to us. So, 7 ideas. You can come up with your own. Okay? 156 days. So Jesus sees this guy that's been unwell for a very, very long time. The beliefs that he has, the ideology that he has around this pool, it's not working. It's not making him better. And so Jesus walks up to him and he asks him a simple question. Do you want to get well? What if you got some of your time back? What if you invested in something that really matters, which is you and this life, this gift that you've been given? So I know that's a daunting and overwhelming thing, so we'll come back and talk about it. But what about for the next 156 days? What could you do? Do you want to get well? I know I do. So how about you? Let's pray. Father God, we love you. We thank you. We thank you for ideas and thoughts that come from these words that you gave us in this book. And God, we thank you for the words of Jesus and the challenges of Jesus. And God, I love this simple question in this context of, do you want to get well? Do you want to be better? And so God, I think there's so many things that weigh us down and bog us down and pull at our hearts and our minds in life and pull at our souls. And God, we like that guy, could have a million excuses why we haven't gotten better or invested in ourselves or done the right things or invested in the right things. God, time might be one of those excuses we use. We're too busy. We're too this. We're too that. But God, if we want to get well, if we want to get better, it starts with us trusting in you, putting our faith in you, and opening ourselves up to you. But it also starts with actually taking practical steps and doing some things. So God, that may look different for every single person in this room, what it looks like to get better, to get well, to get whole. But God, allow your Spirit to speak to our hearts and our minds, to challenge us, to give us what we need, the thoughts and ideas, to give us wisdom, as James says, that's peaceful and pure and lovely and working towards the good that you're willing to do in us and in this world. So Father God, just help us to kind of rationalize and understand who we are, become self-aware. And God, there's so many of us in so many different situations and relationships, and then as a whole in a culture, God, there's just so much brokenness and hurt and pain. And so God, help us to answer the question. Help us to be willing to be that man to say, I want to get better. I want to get up, and to get up, to stand and take our walk and to take those steps, whatever they may be, on the rest of our journey. So Father, we love you. We thank you. We thank you most of all for the grace that even in all of this, when we mess up, when we fail, God, that you're there to give us new grace and new mercy every single day. So we love you and we thank you. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.